The story begins as our protagonist, and Suho, is betrayed by his party members. Weakened by the poison coursing through his body, Suho drops to his knees and presses his hand to the ground. The warrior, Alex Morgan, taunts him, remarking that a man with a broken sword trying to act tough should have just joined them from the start, mocking Suho's stubbornness as a public servant. The mage, Suzuki Endo, adds her own ridicule, saying that no matter how much he's called a sword god or whatever else, there's a vast difference in innate talent. She sneers that she hates men in suits. Suho coughs into his hand, noticing with horror that his blood has turned black from the poison. Memories of their shared past flood his mind, their battles fought side by side, their victories against powerful monsters, the celebrations they shared. He recalls the faces of his comrades and asks, pained, how they could betray him after all they had been through together. His former allies look at him with contempt. Angrily, Suho demands an answer. The healer, Isabella, responds coldly, explaining that it can't be helped since he's the only one opposing their plan. Suho questions them, reminding them of their achievements. They had conquered one of the 5 disastrous gates, and with the remaining 4, they could secure humanity's safety. But now they were willing to leave the gates open, allowing monsters to continue pouring out. He asks how they could act like monsters themselves, endangering humanity. The archer, Hexhood, responds that if all the gates were closed, the hunters who were once revered as heroes would lose their purpose and would be seen as mere thugs. He asks Suho if he too wants to become an object of fear. Then Hood offers Suho one last chance to join them, saying that he'd be willing to let him in out of respect. Suho, however, scoffs, reminding them that after stabbing him in the back, they think they can extend such an offer. Feeling his strength slipping away, he realizes he doesn't have much time left. Suzuki's venom has ravaged his body, leaving him with wounds that cannot heal. Accepting that he won't survive, he resolves to take at least one of them down with him, fulfilling his final duty as a hero of humanity. Gathering the last of his strength, he unleashes a powerful aura, startling his former comrades. Suzuki tries to reassure the group, saying it's just a bluff. After all, he's merely a swordsman with a broken sword. Hood positions himself protectively in front of Isabella, cautiously noting that something feels different. In an instant, Suho lunges forward, swiftly severing Morgan's hand and decapitating Suzuki. Hood pulls Isabella to safety just in time, leaving her shaken. Hood realizes that if he'd reacted any later, he would have been struck down too. His mind races as he wonders how Suho, whose sword was clearly broken, managed such a precise strike. He concludes that Suho must be struggling to breathe, with poison steadily overtaking his body. Isabella turns to Morgan, assuring him that she'll heal his wound. As she begins the healing process, however, she's shocked to find his injuries resistant to her magic. Startled, she realizes this must be the effect of the legendary intangible sword she had only heard about. Meanwhile, Suho stands with his sword in hand, a powerful aura radiating from it. Just then, the poison fully spreads through his body, leaving him weak. Feeling himself fade, he mutters that he's finally grasped it, only to collapse, frustrated, wondering why it had to happen now of all times. As he falls off a cliff, the system congratulates him, announcing that he has reached the realm of divine sword unity. A series of notifications appear, recognizing his awakening to the ultimate level of swordsmanship, his mastery of the formless sword, and the acquisition of his first SS rank skill. The system then offers him a unique opportunity to become even stronger as the first person to reach the realm of the transcendent. A final message appears, saying, rebooting the system for player on Suho. Suho awakens slowly, confused by a bright light, realizing he is being carried by a firefighter. Startled, he looks at the firefighter, who asks if he's all right, mentioning that Suho is injured and that a precursor gate has appeared nearby. He tells Suho that he'll take him to a safe zone. Still disoriented, Suho wonders if he has truly died and tries to understand where he is. As he looks around, he is shocked to see monsters wreaking havoc across the city. He spots a sign reading Sindorum, realizing that Sindorum Station has been contaminated by a gate outbreak. Then, he notices a goblin approaching and an arrow flying from a distance, striking the firefighter and causing them both to fall to the ground. As goblins approach, the firefighter urges Suho to run. Instead, Suho grabs the firefighter's axe, saying he'll borrow it for a moment, and steps forward to face the goblins. The firefighter warns him of the danger, insisting that they should escape. But Suho hurls the axe at one of the goblins, hitting its head and killing it instantly. Checking his own body, he realizes he is unharmed, noticing something peculiar. The system reappears, congratulating him on meeting the conditions for awakening. It declares that he has now awakened as a player and offers him the chance to grow even stronger. Suho laughs, recognizing the familiar process, recalling that it was exactly like this when he first awakened as a player. Finally, the system prompts him to choose the power he wishes to pursue. As Suho is about to choose his class, the firefighter interrupts him, urging him to escape immediately. Realizing he almost instinctively selected the warrior class, Suho quickly commands the system to delay the selection. He reassures the firefighter, saying there's no need to worry. He can handle the goblins alone, as they're only minor threats. Turning to face the goblins, he charges forward, meeting the creatures head-on. One goblin lunges at him, but Suho dodges its attack, startling it. Retrieving the axe he had thrown earlier from the goblin's skull, he swiftly advances, slashing through the creature, which lets out a shriek before collapsing to the ground. Suho reflects that goblins are only dangerous to beginner players and pose little challenge for someone of his skill. He prepares himself, muttering that he'll make quick work of them. In a flurry of swift movements, he decapitates one goblin after another, slashing through the entire group. He finishes by stabbing the last goblin in his path, then pulls his weapon free, leaving all the goblins defeated. As he surveys the scene, Suho thinks to himself that while goblins are easy to handle, his anger still hasn't subsided. Realizing he let his emotions get the best of him, he reminds himself to stay calm in situations like these. Reflecting, he considers that somehow he has returned to giving him a rare opportunity to start over from scratch. A series of notifications appear, and he remarks that it's been a while since he's seen those familiar messages. Commenting on the usefulness of the goblin's sword, Suho then turns to the firefighter, who asks if he's a player. Suho confirms and, deciding he's ready to make his class choice, commands the system to proceed. The available classes appear, and he selects healer. The system prompts him for confirmation, asking if he truly wants to follow the path of a healer. He affirms his choice, and the system announces that he has become a healer, awarding him 5 bonus stat points and granting him the healing light skill. Turning back to the firefighter, Suho tells him he's going to treat his wound and asks him to hold still for a moment. Activating healing light, he places his hand over the injury, and the system confirms that the healing process has begun. Carefully, he removes the arrow from the firefighter's wound and channels the healing light over the affected area, watching as the injury begins to mend. Once the firefighter's wound is fully healed, Suho asks him how he feels. The firefighter, surprised, responds that it doesn't hurt at all and asks if Suho is a healer. Suho replies with a nod, affirming that he is now. Just then, another notification appears, and the system informs him that it wants to present him with a small gift for using his first healing skill. It prompts him to select a weapon from its arsenal. Suho considers this, noting that despite choosing the healer class, his primary weapon is still a sword. The system then summons a beginner's sword, and Suho grips it tightly as the system confirms that he has obtained it. He studies the sword thoughtfully, declaring his intention to conquer the nearby gate. The firefighter warns him about the danger of going alone. Suho assures him that it's fine, explaining that he has something to gain from it. Reflecting on his situation, he realizes that just as he acquired swordsmanship skills before choosing a class, any skills he gains through his natural talent can be used freely, regardless of additionally. Skills from his chosen class will automatically upgrade as his level increases. He recalls how Isabella's Holy Spirit light skill also began as a basic healing skill. Suho thinks back to his past. If he'd been able to heal his injuries then, the outcome could have been very different. Determined not to repeat past mistakes, he resolves to become both a swordsman and a healer so he can protect his allies and grow stronger faster than before. His goal is to acquire skills quickly and level up, remembering that the gate ahead is an unpredictable premonition gate. Suho recalls that, in his past life, he nearly died attempting to conquer this very gate. Although his current skill level is low, he feels certain things will be different this time. Even if the challenges remain, the swordsmanship ingrained in his mind will guide him, and he's ready to start over. With renewed resolve, he places his hand on the gate, and a red aura glows around it. Closing his eyes briefly, he hears the system announce his entry into the gate. When Suho opens his eyes, he steps into the mysterious realm known as Green-Red. The system's notifications reveal that the gate's entry conditions and maximum capacity remain unknown. Suho roams the area inside the gate, noting the lifeless goblins scattered around. He realizes that these creatures, who had been rampaging outside as if the world was theirs, were actually fleeing from something within. As he examines the dead goblins, he hears a sound and considers the reason the goblins were running and why the gate is called Green-Red. Just then, two hobgoblins emerge, one at level 10 and the other at level 12. One of them shoves a dead goblin aside and points its sword menacingly at Suho. Standing his ground, Suho deduces that these hobgoblins see him as their prey instead of the weaker goblins. He also notes their red skin, larger frames, and stronger muscles, features that set them apart from ordinary goblins. The hobgoblin lunges forward, but Suho remains calm, thinking, it's still just a goblin. The hobgoblin seems momentarily surprised by his confidence and swings its sword, but Suho dodges by leaping back. He recognizes that his current level isn't high enough to pierce its tough skin, but spotting an opening, he crouches and springs forward, targeting the hobgoblin's weak point. He plunges his sword into its eye, and it shrieks in pain. Suho realizes that this tactic would be impossible if there were a huge level difference, or if the monster had vastly superior traits, but against a mere hobgoblin, it's manageable. After swiftly killing the hobgoblin, Suho feels a pang of disappointment, muttering that he took it down out of habit. He reminds himself to be more cautious with each encounter and make full use of his enemies until he finds others. As he smirks with confidence, the remaining hobgoblin, angered, charges at him in a frenzy. Suho dodges each attack with precision, remembering that if he repeats certain actions often enough, he can acquire a skill related to that action. The hobgoblin's relentless assault eventually results in it smashing the ground. Just as the system notifies Suho that he has mastered the dodge skill, he grins, pleased to have acquired dodge. Both fighters grip their swords tightly. Suho parries the hobgoblin's attack, reflecting on how parrying is a foundational skill, integral to more advanced techniques. He continues to parry each strike, and soon the system notifies him that he has mastered parry. Suho feels lucky to have gained this skill before the hobgoblin wore itself out. With the creature now vulnerable, he tightens his grip on his sword and decapitates the hobgoblin, ready to seek out more enemies. Surveying the area, he decides that it's time to start earning experience points in earnest. Meanwhile, outside the gate, a group of people watches. One man questions who dared to enter the gate without permission, wondering which faction he belongs to. Another man remarks that if Suho dies inside, it will become a legend, questioning who this bold intruder could be. Two men in suits approach the firefighter, asking if it's true that a beginner player entered the gate. The firefighter confirms, explaining that Suho had seemed new to being a player. He recounts how Suho had handled a group of goblins on his own, healed his wounds, and entered the gate with purpose, saying he had something to gain from it. One of the men in suits, astonished, remarks that despite arriving just minutes after the incident, Suho had already taken down the goblins and is a healer no less. He shakes his head, muttering that such a feat is unbelievable. One of the men in suits observes that all the defeated monsters thus far have been goblins, suggesting that the gate itself doesn't seem overly difficult. Still, he finds it hard to believe that a healer would attempt to conquer a gate alone, let alone take down so many goblins without a scratch. Skeptical, he mutters that this guy must have entered without fully thinking it through. There's no way a healer would be crazy enough to venture into a gate solo. However, he admits to himself that if this healer does manage to clear the gate, they'll need to act immediately. Turning to his partner, he instructs him to report any changes in the gate and to notify him the moment anyone exits. His partner agrees, and the man contemplates that if Suho succeeds, they must ensure he joins their faction. The scene shifts to Green-Red, where Suho is dashing through, quickly eliminating hobgoblins in his path. The system confirms each kill, notifying him of his progress. Suho tightens his grip on his sword and slashes through to a bunch of hobgoblin with one swing until only one remains. As the last hobgoblin reaches for its weapon, Suho kicks it away, making the creature tremble. Looking down at it, he says he'll let it go, on the condition that it brings back as many allies as it can. Terrified, the hobgoblin flees, and Suho calls after it, challenging it to bring reinforcements. While he waits, Suho considers distributing his stat points, deciding it's better to raise them evenly rather than focusing on just one. With all the bonus points he's received from his kills, leveling up has come easily, and he has acquired most of the essential skills. Looking over the fallen hobgoblins, he mutters to himself that the item he needs should be around here. Striking one of the bodies, he finds a small magic stone and smiles, pleased by the discovery. Though he wouldn't have bothered with something so minor in the past, he figures the stone's value, about 50,000 won, will come in handy given his current lack of funds. Deciding to search more thoroughly, he collects all the magic stones, calculating that selling them would yield a decent profit. Suddenly, Suho senses movement. His wait is over. The hobgoblin horde has arrived. Counting roughly 30 of them, he notes that they'll provide a good source of experience points before he confronts the boss. Eyeing the group, he remarks that the hobgoblin has indeed brought a significant number of companions from the underworld. The hobgoblin leader, snarling, commands its troops to kill him. As the horde charges, Suho braces himself, then leaps forward, launching a powerful attack that cuts down several hobgoblins at once. The remaining hobgoblins retaliate, but he swiftly slashes through each one, leveling up as he gains experience. His stats increase by 1, along with an additional bonus point. Seeing the vast number of foes before him, he grins and declares that he'll finish this quickly. Suho then slices through the hobgoblins with ease, dashing forward to stab another as blood splatters around him. Amid the intense battle, he notices something ominous approaching. Suddenly, the boss of the gate, the chief hobgoblin, launches an attack. Suho blocks it, smirking as he remarks that the boss has finally arrived. Minutes later, a massive explosion shook the forest as the boss hobgoblin slammed its axe into the ground. Suho dodged the attack, but out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a hobgoblin attempting to ambush him from behind. Blocking its strike, he told it not to interrupt while the big guys are playing, and sliced through the creature instantly. Just then, the boss let out a deafening roar, and the system notified Suho that the chief hobgoblin was using a fear skill. Surprise! Suho felt his muscles go rigid, recognizing that he'd fallen under the skill's effect. He recalled that fear is a skill that induces terror, with its effects intensifying based on the user's level and stats. He hadn't anticipated encountering such an ability in a low-level gate, though it made sense for a boss monster to wield it. The boss, now smirking, prepared to launch another attack. Realizing he lacked any mental protection skills or items, Suho knew he couldn't counter the fear effect in the usual way. However, he remembered a different approach, one involving inflicting pain on himself to break free. Grabbing the blade of his own sword, he cut into his hand. The system then confirmed that he had broken free from the state of fear. That was close, he muttered, parrying the boss's next attack and catching it off guard, deciding to eliminate the smaller enemies first. He dashed forward and swiftly killed all remaining hobgoblins in green-red. Afterward, Suho used his healing light skill on his injured hand, watching as the system confirmed that the wound was healed. Clenching his fist, he turned to face the boss, who stared back angrily. Suho smirked and taunted, asking if they should have a cozy time with just the two of them. The battle between Suho and the boss began in earnest. Despite the difference in their levels, Suho fought skillfully, accumulating small but steady damage on the boss. He prepared his next move, targeting a small cut on the boss's leg. He aimed to exploit this weak point, intending to deal a fatal blow by repeatedly striking the wound. The boss roared again, attempting to use fear once more, but Suho dismissed it, knowing that fear wouldn't affect him now that he'd overcome it. He pulled his sword from the boss's leg and launched a series of relentless attacks, leaving the boss bewildered and reeling from the onslaught. Finally, the boss spat blood and collapsed to the ground. Approaching the fallen boss, Suho placed his hand on its head and cast healing light. The boss, confused, looked up at him. Suho told it to get up, saying he wasn't finished with it yet. Moments later, a series of notifications appeared, congratulating Suho on upgrading his diagonal/horizontal stab to Ranky. His cutting power increased by 30% and penetration by 50%. Grinning, Suho placed his hand on the boss again, casting healing light once more, which left the boss trembling in terror. Another notification confirmed that Suho's actions exhibited an overwhelming presence capable of intimidating even a boss monster, awarding him the skill Intimidation, now at rank A. He mused that mastering intimidation completed his skill set, and he smiled, Turning to the boss, Suho declared that his role is over and should go straight to hell. With one swift motion, he beheaded the chief hobgoblin, ending the battle. The system congratulates Suho on mastering decapitation, confirming that the chief hobgoblin has been killed. It announces that he has conquered the gate, awarding him the title of MVP. As the MVP, Suho gains additional experience points, a bonus stat, and levels up. All his stats increase by 1, and he receives yet another bonus stat. Upon reaching level 10, the system encourages him to grow even stronger, awarding him 5 additional stat points. His healing light skill ranks up, and as he reaches this milestone, the level of all healer exclusive skills increases by 1 stage. He acquires a new skill, Cure, which he realizes will allow him to counter debuffs effectively. Reflecting on his progress, Suho thinks that as he continues to develop his skills, he'll someday be able to cure even the deadliest poisons. With everything accomplished in the gate, he turns toward the exit, remarking to himself that it's time to see some familiar faces again after a long while. Outside the gate, a crowd has gathered, watching the gate's tremors. One person speculates that the gate may have been conquered, noticing someone emerging. As Suho steps out, the bystanders murmur in disbelief, wondering if he truly cleared the gate alone. Scouts from various guilds immediately approach him, inviting him to join their ranks, but he ignores them, effortlessly leaping down from the floating rocks to the ground below. Landing smoothly, Suho approaches young Chulman, the team leader of the South Korean Hunter Association, and greets him, leaving Chulman puzzled. Another man asks Chulman if he knows Suho, to which Chulman replies that he doesn't. Moments later, Suho and Chulman are seated in an office at the South Korean Hunter Association. Chulman looks at his tablet, recalling how Suho had confidently extended his hand to greet him and introduced himself. They shook hands, and Chulman had introduced himself as a representative from the Gate Management Division of the association. Curious, Chulman asks how Suho knows him and if he has any specific business with him. Suho replies that he planned to discuss the details later at the association, as he's there to obtain a hunter's license. Chulman asks if he's there for a license renewal. Chulman considers the situation, realizing that since Suho isn't renewing a license, he must be an unregistered hunter, a newly awakened player. It's unusual, he thinks, for someone from the healer class, typically the weakest among the 4 class categories, to conquer a gate solo. As Suho eats, he notices Chulman's pensive expression and asks if there's an issue with his results. Reviewing the data, Chulman can't help but notice that Suho's performance aligns more with a warrior's than a healer. He confirms Suho's name, and Suho responds affirmatively. Curious about his background, Chulman asks what Suho was doing before this. Suho explains that he's a college dropout. When Chulman probes further, wondering if Suho was unemployed, Suho admits he struggled academically. Chulman guesses he may have been in medical studies, but Suho clarifies that he studied physical education, surprising Chulman. Most people with Suho's background, he reflects, would have chosen to be a warrior or archer. Chulman then asks why he chose the healer class, to which Suho responds after a moment's thought, explaining that he dislikes getting hurt. Chulman, still intrigued by Suho's ability to clear the gate alone, asks for details about how he did it. Suho explains that there wasn't much of a strategy. He entered the gate, encountered a hobgoblin, and killed it to survive. Chulman, surprised to hear that a hobgoblin was involved, watches as Suho extends his arm and releases a collection of magic stones from his inventory, leaving Chulman visibly astonished. Suho clarifies that these stones were collected from hobgoblins and the gate's boss, admitting he's unsure of their exact value and is willing to let Chulman handle it. Chulman agrees to process them quickly, though he can't help but feel curious about Suho's intentions, grabbing one of the magic crystal and looks at it. He asks Suho if he truly wants to become a hunter, and Suho affirms, explaining that he made up his mind as soon as he awakened as a player. Impressed yet cautious, Chulman commends his decision but warns that it might seem impulsive, wondering if there's a deeper reason. Suho reflects, then admits he's uncertain about his exact motivations. Chulman, trying to hide a smirk, turns away, but Suho notices and thinks that he's not very good at concealing his expressions. Suho goes on to explain that he understands people become hunters for various reasons, but his own motivation is personal. He reveals that he lost his entire family in a gate-related incident, which filled him with a deep resentment toward monsters and gates. Although he knew it was dangerous, Entering the gate alone was an emotional decision. He hoped that killing monsters might ease his frustration, but he still felt unresolved. Reflecting on his past, he realized that his purpose is to prevent others from experiencing similar loss and to protect people from the devastation caused by monsters. Chulman, moved by Suho's determination, listens intently as Suho expresses his commitment to joining the South Korean Hunter Association, driven by a desire to ensure everyone's safety. Chulman is momentarily speechless, then expresses how pleased he is to hear Suho's motivations. He confirms if Suho is sure about joining the South Korean Hunter Association, reminding him that being a civil servant hunter means earning a considerably lower salary than hunters in private guilds. Suho assures him that he understands his priority isn't the pay, but rather the perks that come with SKA, such as unrestricted access to various gates, priority in gate conquests, and strict enforcement against player crimes. Intrigued, Chulman asks what he means by this. Suho explains that he wants to be actively involved in the field, particularly in gate conquests. Chulman is shocked, thinking about how rare it is for someone to want this kind of work. While SKA has priority access to gates, it often auctions them off to private guilds to avoid unnecessary risk to its own hunters, who receive lower salaries. Most civil servant hunters are driven by the stability of the role, often aiming for administrative positions to avoid entering gates altogether. Unlike the others, Suho genuinely wants to be in the field, driven by a commitment to public safety, a rare type of patriotism in their field. Leaning back in his, Chulman feels a mix of pride and disbelief. Meeting someone like Suho is a refreshing experience. When Suho notices Chulman's reaction and asks if he's all right, Chulman smiles, explaining that it's been a long time since he's met someone with such dedication. He promises to complete Suho's registration and prepare the necessary documentation. However, he informs Suho that to take the hunter exam, he'll need to pass an aptitude test, a written exam, and a practical exam. Chulman then points out that registration for this year's exam has already closed, and that the exam itself is scheduled for tomorrow, which leaves Suho surprised. Seeing his reaction, Chulman offers to add him as a last-minute registrant, explaining that it's allowed under the rules since Suho conquered a gate alone. He can submit a recommendation to the higher-ups, which should secure approval. He warns Suho, however, that preparing for both the written and practical exams in just one day will be challenging. Given Suho's field performance, Chulman has no concerns about the physical aspect, but he worries about the written exam. Suho, undeterred, insists that he's ready to take on the challenge and asks to be registered. He reasons that it's an excellent opportunity to gain experience in the exam process, even if he doesn't pass. Confidently, he decides to tackle the exams all at once the next day. Chulman informs Suho that he can view his aptitude test results that same day. Suho thanks him, but with a hint of embarrassment, admits that he currently doesn't have the money for the registration fees and asks if the magic stones can be processed right away. Chulman agrees to handle it while verifying the test results, and Suho feels a surge of gratitude, thinking that even now, Chulman is the one person he can truly rely on. Suho thanks him warmly. A few minutes later, Chulman returns, informing Suho that all the aptitude tests have been completed and that the proceeds from the magic stones have been deposited into his account. Checking his phone as he eats, Suho is pleasantly surprised by the amount, while Chulman explains that civil servant hunters receive a tax exemption benefit specifically for magic stones. Amazed, Suho asks if this means they're effectively duty-free. He then hesitantly requests another favor, explaining that he's heard the association has a library with workbooks and reference materials relevant to tomorrow's exam. With the test so close, he feels the need to cram and asks if he could study there to prepare. Chulman, delighted, assures him that he's more than welcome to use the library. Chulman then personally shows Suho to the library, mentioning that he doesn't need an employee card to leave, so he's free to study there as long as he needs. Chulman wishes him luck on tomorrow's exam, and Suho bows in thanks, telling him to be careful on his way home. As Chulman heads out, Suho watches him, reflecting that Chulman is as kind and dependable as ever, even though he's unaware of the pivotal role he'll play as the future president of the association. Suho smiles to himself, finding it amusing to pretend he knows nothing, knowing he'd raise suspicion if he acted as though he already knew everything. He turns and sets off, resolved to locate what he came for. As he roams the library, he recalls the major events that will shape the future. However, He realizes he can't remember every detail. After all, he's only human, and wishes he had a skill to aid his memory. His attention is then caught by a large, intriguing book, which he pulls from the shelf. The system informs him that it's a book from another world. Suho recalls that, in the past, a single line of text would appear whenever he tried to extract information from the book. There was also supposed to be a unique way to interact with it, so he places the book on his head, expecting a reaction, but nothing happens. Confused, he wonders why it isn't working as he remembers. Just then, a system notification pops up, stating that the Library of Memories has taken an interest in his story. The system then reveals that the Library of Memories is inviting him. The book begins to glow, and before he can react, Suho is transported to another world, the Library of Memories. In the Library of Memories, one gains the ability to recall everything they've ever seen or heard, even painful and distressing experiences. Normally, the human mind is able to endure hardship partly due to the mechanism of forgetting. But upon acquiring this skill, one becomes bound by the curse of memory. The original holder of this skill was the manager of the Hexaeon Guild, a former employee of the Korean Hunter Association. She had stumbled upon the skill while studying in this very library. Needing a break, she'd used the book as a pillow to sleep, finding it uncomfortable to sleep face down. It was said that she was lucky enough to acquire the skill unintentionally. Suho smiles, knowing he owes her a meal when he sees her next, as this valuable information came from her experience. As Suho stands there, a system notification appears, asking if he would like to donate his story to the Library of Memories. He reflects on the overwhelming recall this skill provides, realizing that with it, he could recover all of his memories in their original clarity. Memories naturally fade and become altered over time, but to truly capture every detail accurately, he understands he must obtain this skill. The system then confirms that his story has been accepted, and the Library of Memories begins documenting his memories. Suho watches as his body seems to dissolve into pieces of paper, surrounded by a swirl of letters. The letters scatter and fall, and the system announces that the Library of Memories has been opened to him. Suho now possesses the ability to store everything he has seen and heard within this library and access it whenever he needs. He notes the strange sensation of the recording process, likely due to the illusionary nature of the space. Curious to test his new ability, Suho focuses, takes a deep breath, and closes his eyes. When he opens them, they glow as he is transported back to the moment when his party betrayed him. He can still feel the raw emotions from that Tamiya: resentment, anger, and betrayal. The selfish traitors who sabotaged the chance to close the gate just to save themselves remain etched in his memory. Annoyed, he shifts his thoughts to avoid lingering in those painful moments. Suddenly, Suho notices something new in the system, wondering what it might be. The system informs him that, as the first to reach the realm of the transcendent, he is being offered a unique opportunity to grow stronger. It announces that it is rebooting the system for player on Suho. Puzzled by the rebooting message, he finds himself back in the Library of Memories, standing in silence and questioning whether the system has truly sent him back in time. Recalling that he previously attained the state of Divine Sword Unity and acquired his first SS grade skill, Suho realizes that reaching the Transcendent Realm has triggered this unexpected opportunity. The implications are staggering, leading him to wonder if his return to the past is more than mere coincidence. Moments later, Suho arrived by taxi. As he stepped out, he reflected on the fact that whatever the reason for his return to the past, the most important thing was that he had this second chance. Not only could he now prevent his own misfortunes, but he could also help mitigate the initial wave of unpredictable gate outbreaks that had caused countless casualties. With this knowledge, he wondered if he might even conquer the gates faster this time, determined not to waste any of his valuable time. Standing before the towering Nexus building, the largest private hunter academy in the country, Suho gazed up in admiration, thinking it was as impressive as people claimed. Realizing he would need substantial funds for his future plans, he decided that this academy would be a good place to start earning. Entering the building, he was greeted by a receptionist who politely inquired about his purpose. Suho explained that he wanted to meet with Director Kim Soo-ae. When she asked if he had a scheduled appointment, he replied that he had not, but had an important matter to discuss. The receptionist apologized, explaining that meetings with the director required advanced scheduling. Suho suggested she simply pass along a message, mentioning that the solo conqueror of the Sindorim Station pre-catastrophe gate was here. Minutes later, Suho was ushered into the director's office, where a woman introduced herself as Kim Soo-ae, the director of Nexus Academy. Suho bowed in greeting, introducing himself as An Suho. She invited him to take a seat and acknowledged his reputation as the solo conqueror of the recent Sindorim pre-catastrophe gate. Curious, she asked what brought him to Nexus. Suho explained that he was there to request a scholarship as he planned to take the hunter license test the following day. Kim Soo-ae was momentarily speechless, then asked how long it had been since his awakening. Suho replied that it had occurred just today, further surprising her. She reconfirmed, somewhat stunned, that he was an unregistered hunter who awakened that day, would take the hunter license test tomorrow, and had already cleared a pre-catastrophe gate solo at Sindorim. Suho confirmed, adding that he had been fortunate enough to connect with someone at the Hunter Association who helped him secure a spot for the tests. He then confidently stated his intention to aim for the top position in the examination, which left her visibly intrigued. Suho proposed that if he achieved the top rank, Nexus should grant him the status of a scholarship student, including full financial support. Suho acknowledges to himself that it's rare for a complete rookie to take the top spot in the hunter test, but he's no ordinary candidate. He's a veteran who has conquered countless gates. Ultimately, though, the choice is hers to make. Director Kim Soo-ae comments that while his solo conquest of an unprecedented gate is impressive, the hunter test is a different challenge entirely, with an average pass rate of less than 20%. Suho counters confidently, stating that if he doesn't come in first, she can disregard his application, along with any scholarship consideration. Curious, Soo-ae asks why he chose Nexus over other prestigious academies like Hexagon and Prime. Suho replies that it's because Nexus is in a regrettable situation, a comment that leaves her visibly uneasy. He elaborates, explaining that although Nexus is the largest academy in the country, it has failed to produce a first or second place hunter test winner in recent years, leading to a noticeable decline in enrollment. Soo-ae knows there's truth in his words. Nexus does need to start producing results, but they haven't seen any standout students rising through the ranks. She considers the potential benefits. If Suho, the solo conqueror of a pre-catastrophe gate, were to achieve the top score on the hunter test as a Nexus student, the academy would gain immense prestige. His proposal is undeniably appealing. With only one reservation, she asks how much he expects in scholarship funds. Suho inquires about the standard scholarship amount for the top student. She explains that it includes a full refund of tuition for the year, an additional 30 million won as a congratulatory bonus, and the option to join the Nexus Guild if the candidate desires. Acknowledging Nexus's generosity, Suho then suggests an amount of 300 million won, a figure that takes her by surprise. He points out that considering Nexus's size and the added benefits for a top student, this sum is reasonable. He adds that 300 million isn't a significant amount for an institution like Nexus, and though her frustration shows, Suho can't deny his reasoning. Finally, she agrees, committing to pay him 300 million won if he earns the top spot on the test. She then offers to prepare the contract and suggests he explore the campus while she handles the paperwork. A few minutes later, Suho finds himself wandering through Nexus's vast grounds, marveling at the sheer size of the place. It's even larger than an amusement park, he thinks. Once enrolled, he won't be lacking in any resources. A staff member accompanying him, slightly dizzy from the tour, remarks that Nexus is indeed the largest academy in South Korea. Suho realizes the man must have been roused from his rest and thanks him for showing him around at such a late hour. The staff member responds graciously, saying it's the least he can do for such an important guest. Just then, Suho notices someone training alone on the academy's outdoor field. Though he can't see clearly from this distance, he asks if it's a student. The staff member confirms, explaining that the student is highly dedicated, training even at this hour. The staff member calls out to the student, Daehan, advising him to balance practice with taking care of his body. Daehan replies that as a third-year student, he feels he has to push himself even harder. Hearing Daehan's name triggers a memory for Suho. He had formed a few raid parties with Daehan in his previous life. Back then, Daehan was known as the top tank in the country with immense mental resilience and defense. Unfortunately, the role of pure tankers had declined over time. Suho notices Daehan is wielding a battle axe instead of a shield. signaling that he hasn't yet discovered his true aptitude. Suho sees this as an opportunity. If he can build a connection with Dahan now, he might bring him into the Hunter Association and steer him toward his strengths. The staff member introduces Suho to Kang Dahan, a student at the academy, and they exchange greetings. Suho, sensing Dahan's determination, asks if he's preparing for the upcoming test and if he plans to use the battle axe as his primary weapon. Dahan confirms, explaining that he's aiming to become a melee fighter and that, after consulting with others, he was advised to use a weapon that suits his physique. The staff member adds that few weapons can rival the destructive power of the battle axe. Curious, Suho inquires if Dahan has focused solely on the battle axe. Dahan admits that he has, noting that he's a slow learner and didn't want to waste time trying out different weapons. It took him 2 years to reach proficiency with the battle axe alone, and even now, he's not very skilled with it. Suho thinks to himself that the battle axe clearly doesn't suit Dahan's natural aptitude. He wonders if Dahan's persistence is due to perseverance or sheer stubbornness. As it seems, he should have considered switching weapons early on. Lost in thought, Suho places his hand on his forehead, causing Dahan and the staff member to look at him in confusion. Dahan asks if something is wrong. Suho reflects that it's surprising how even the country's largest academy can be lax in guiding its students. He explains that he was simply thinking about an alternative approach for Dahan. He suggests that Dahan should choose a weapon that feels natural to him, as all players receive stat adjustments, which help them adapt to their chosen weapons. Dahan, intrigued, asks if that's true. Suho confirms, adding that skill proficiency can increase quickly with the right weapon, thanks to the skill correction effect. However, success also depends on personal comfort and experience with the weapon. Given how long it took Dahan to gain proficiency with the battle axe, Suho points out that it may not be the ideal weapon for him, leaving Dahan in disbelief. Suho explains to Dahan that while the battle axe offers impressive destructive power, it also leaves a long gap after each attack, creating a vulnerable interval. Without measures to cover this gap, Dahan is at high risk of being countered. Given Dahan's large frame, he adds, it would be difficult for another tank to protect him effectively. Dahan, feeling the weight of his 3 years of training, comments on his commitment to the battle axe. Seeing Dahan's dedication, Suho firmly suggests an alternative. If Dahan has the perseverance to handle an unsuitable weapon for so long, it likely means his true aptitude is closer to that of a tank. He advises Dahan to equip a kite shield on his left arm and a one-handed bludgeon on his right, assuring him that his practical scores will improve significantly with this setup. Dahan hesitates, pointing out that switching roles just before the test could be risky. In response, Suho asks him what he believes to be the core of any party. Dahan guesses it's the mage, but Suho corrects him, explaining that the tank is the party's foundation. The tank's role is to draw aggro while defending the mage and healer, allowing the entire party to function effectively. When Dahan asks if a shield alone would suffice, Suho explains that a skilled tank should also use a primary weapon alongside the shield to manage crowd control. Seeing the logic in this, Dahan decides to give it a try, grateful for the advice. Suho is pleased to see that Dahan is both resilient and willing to make quick, practical decisions. As Dahan departs, the staff member informs Suho that the director has requested he continue showing Suho around the academy. Curious about Suho's deep insights into contracts and weapon strategy, the staff member asks if he's there as an instructor. Noting the caution in the man's expression, Suho replies that he's not an instructor, but rather something closer to a stakeholder. The staff member looks puzzled by the term, but before he can ask further, Suho inquires if the contract is ready as quite some time has passed. Just then, the staff member receives a call confirming it and leads Suho back to the director's office. The following day, at the South Korean Hunter Association, the area in front of the building buzzes with examinees. Armed with their swords, they're all prepared to earn their hunter licenses, having trained extensively to be in peak condition for this critical day. Among them, our boy Suho, the lone conqueror of a gate, is notably exhausted. He reflects that perhaps he shouldn't have wandered around so much the previous day. The announcement instructs all test takers to line up according to their assigned numbers for individual drug tests. Suho, feeling a bit restless, reflects on the purpose of the test, which is to detect potential doping. However, he knows it won't necessarily be effective, as many cheaters don't use conventional drugs but instead rely on skill buffs. Given that the test takers are at most level 5, The presence of a higher magic wavelength is a clear giveaway. Observing the crowd, Suho senses that several individuals are buffed, not just one or two. His own sensitivity to magic is far more refined than that of the average person, and the system promptly congratulates him on mastering magic detection. With this skill, Suho can more clearly distinguish those who have been buffed, noting that cheating is surprisingly widespread. He considers how this hasn't yet become a major issue, even though abuse of buff skills is already this prevalent. Determined to address it eventually, he scans the crowd and spots Choman, who gives him an encouraging nod. Suho is relieved to see someone there who's clean. A little while later, at the Hunter exam site, two men nearby discuss the exam, while Suho reflects with slight amusement on how his advanced abilities make him feel like an unintentional cheater. Choman approaches and asks how he's feeling about the test so far. Suho confidently replies that he's sure he'll pass. When asked why he's there, Choman explains that he's assisting due to the association's ongoing staffing shortage. He mentions that he heard this written test was the hardest yet and commends Suho's confidence. Suho casually mentions something he observed earlier. He noticed the exam staff didn't conduct any buff checks and asks if there's a particular reason for this. Curious, he suggests that a buff check would help catch cheaters using skill-based advantages. As they scan the area, Suho elaborates, explaining that to prevent drug doping, the association conducts urine and blood tests. Additionally, they confiscate belongings and require test takers to wear standardized uniforms to prevent item-based cheating. However, skill-based cheating, such as buffing, seems to go unchecked, and magic detection could be an effective countermeasure. Grateful for the insight, Choman assures Suho that he'll bring it up before the practical test begins. Before Suho heads off to prepare, Choman stops him and expresses that he personally hopes Suho will join the association, saying he'd really like to work with him. Wishing him good luck, Choman encourages him to perform well in the practical test, to which Suho thanked him. 30 minutes later, at the practical test venue, an announcement informs the candidates that the test will be postponed by 2 hours due to issues with the dive capsules. They are advised to have lunch in the cafeteria and wait in the lounge or training area. Suho smiles to himself, suspecting that the capsule issue is merely an excuse for Choman to implement additional measures against skill buffs, a response he appreciates as it shows how swiftly Choman acts. Knowing there are 12-0 candidates in that test, and the passing rate was below 10%, if they can identify the cheaters there, maybe it will drop to 7%. Those who will pass the exam will be pure, top-notch talents. As Suho observes the crowd, he overhears a heated exchange. One man challenges another to a sparring match, but the second man dismissively tells him to get lost, accusing him of picking a fight to show off his skills. Unperturbed, the challenger insists he only wants a spar, but his opponent taunts him, suggesting he stay out of the way and not act tough. Suddenly, the challenger lunges forward to strike. Before he can land the blow, Suho steps in, blocking the attack and pushing the aggressor back. Bewildered by the unexpected interference, the aggressor's opponent accuses him of having lost his mind. Pointing his wooden sword at the attacker, Suho calmly assures the man he'll handle the situation and urges him to stay out of it. When asked if he's an officer, Suho replies that he's just a fellow test taker, but insists that nothing good will come from escalating the conflict. The aggressor, visibly irritated, demands to know why Suho is interfering. Suho introduces himself and notes that the man seems to be seeking a sparring partner. He offers himself as an opponent. Scoffing, the man sneers that he wouldn't waste time on someone weak, claiming Suho only got lucky earlier. Suho taunts him, implying that he's too scared to accept the challenge. Infuriated, the man finally agrees, muttering that he was bored and surrounded by cowardly idiots anyway. Suho suggests they head to the sparring arena and obtain the supervisor's approval for an official match. Soon, the two stand ready in the sparring arena, drawing curious murmurs from the onlookers who speculate about their motives and complain that they're attention seekers causing a scene on exam day. The supervisor instructs them that only training weapons provided by the association may be used and warns that he'll intervene if things get too intense. Raising his hand, he signals the start of the match. The man immediately launches a series of aggressive attacks, but Suho calmly blocks each strike. Frustrated, the man jumps into the air and swings his sword in a wide arc, only for Suho to dodge effortlessly, smirking as he does. Enraged by Suho's cool demeanor, the man shouts that he'll make him regret it, slashing his sword downward in a powerful strike. Suho, however, calmly steps on the man's sword, pinning it down and leaving him momentarily confused. Mocking him, Suho remarks on his opponent's weakness, calling him completely unskilled, which only serves to fuel the man's anger further. Park Young, known as the Mad Swordsman, had an insatiable thirst for power, constantly seeking out fights with experts to push his skills further. This relentless desire for advanced swordsmanship eventually led him down a dark path, transforming him into a hunter-killer. Suho recalls that in his previous life, Young's skills were impressive when they clashed. Determined to prevent Young from repeating his mistakes, Suho takes a quick offensive and kicks him, forcing Young to stagger back. Mockingly, Suho reminds him of his earlier bravado, and Young, bewildered by Suho's immense strength, questions it aloud. Suho taunts him, suggesting that charging in recklessly won't work and sarcastically asks if he wants to continue. He realizes Young must be shaken. This is likely his first encounter with a level 10 opponent, while the strongest he's faced so far would have been around level 5. Seeing the challenge, Young smirks, claiming he now understands Suho's confidence. He promises to go all out, taking a more aggressive stance. Suho casually responds, agreeing to play along. Young leaps, aiming to strike from above. As he brings his weapon down, Suho blocks with ease, meeting each of Young's continuous attacks with effortless parries. Suho notes the increased force behind Young's swings, while Young demands to know if he intends to keep acting unbothered. Bracing himself, Young assumes a familiar posture that Suho recognizes as the beginning form of the Dragon Sword technique, Young's personal style in the future. As they both take their stances, Young unleashes an attack he believes will connect. However, Suho fully blocks it, leaving Young stunned. Smiling, Suho points out that he managed to block the strike, while Young, frustrated, questions how this is possible. Suho dismisses it as a slow attack, thinking to himself that Young's form is still just a basic sword technique, far from the true Dragon Sword technique. Without a hunter's license or advanced training, Young couldn't have mastered it yet. Enraged, Young renews his assault, but Suho swiftly dodges every move, gradually forcing Young back. As Young makes a final move, confident he has cornered Suho, Suho calmly counters with a palm strike to Young's chin, rendering him unconscious. Before he loses consciousness, Young tries to process how he was defeated, but Suho simply tells him that his attacks were too slow. As Young hits the ground, Suho decides to end the encounter there. Pushing Young too far might damage his confidence, which could lead to bigger issues down the line. Now that Young is fixated on surpassing him, Suho hopes he'll be too preoccupied to challenge anyone else, ensuring a quieter testing center. He calls for the supervisor, who seems momentarily distracted. After a few more calls, the supervisor snaps to attention, and Suho explains that he accidentally knocked Young out, asking him to look after him until he regains consciousness. Minutes later, Suho enters the Hunter Association building to begin the practical tests. Observing the scene, he notices skilled managers stationed nearby, likely doping inspectors disguised as technicians. He watches as a few test takers are discreetly escorted away. A technician approaches Suho, instructing him to lie down in the dive capsule and informing him that if he feels anything strange during the process, he should press the button to request emergency assistance. Suho acknowledges, understanding the protocol. Once the technician initiates the dive sequence, the capsule begins to close, and Suho shuts his eyes. The Hunter Practical Test Program activates, connecting to his consciousness, and as the dive reaches 100% synchronization, the Healer Practical Test Scenario program launches. Suho recalls that this exam is notoriously difficult, with an especially low pass rate for healers. He soon understands why, as he hears desperate cries for help within the scenario. Astonished by the setup, he marvels at how mercilessly intense the Hunter Association has made this scenario. He adjusts his sleeves, resigned to the fact that taking the Hunter test might turn out to be a bit traumatic. Steeling himself, Suho comments on the high demand for healers and decides it's time to get started. The practical test is considered the core of the Hunter examination, with the primary focus on assessing how well each candidate aligns with their chosen class. The simulation scenarios change every year, along with the passing criteria. Typically, candidates are evaluated on how long they can survive and the number of opponents they defeat. Scenarios often range from one-on-one battles to one versus many, depending on the candidate's class. However, the healer's test is unique. Unlike offensive classes, where combat prowess and skill are prioritized, healers are graded on different virtues. Although strong healing abilities are valuable, the trait most emphasized for healers is sacrifice. Candidates who display selflessness, even risking their lives to protect others, are awarded higher scores. In essence, for this test, healers are expected to die while protecting their patient. Suho realizes a unique challenge in his case. His stats are still fully intact, which means he has to endure a prolonged beating before he can fail by dying. He spots a sword nearby and picks it up, thinking there's no way he's going to let himself get beaten to death just to pass the test. After all, asking someone who's already experienced death to die again seems a bit much. Suddenly, he hears screams echoing through the scenario, a cacophony of pleas for help from various directions. In reality, the simulated environment is filled with corpses, the aftermath of an unseen catastrophe. Suho approaches a trembling woman and asks if she's all right. Terrified, she warns that the monsters will return and urges him to run before they come back. Suho quickly deduces that his test mission is to protect her at all costs until the end. Reassuring her, he tells her not to worry, promising that the rescue team will arrive soon and that he'll keep her safe. Until then. Standing guard before her, Suho steels himself for the trial ahead. Meanwhile, in the practical exam area outside the simulation, another test taker exits his capsule. The exhausted examinee, visibly disappointed, remarks that he could have done more. The examiner thanks him for his efforts and directs him to collect his belongings and head home. The examinee, identified as Kang Jin Young, an archer, logs a time of 9 minutes and 4 seconds. Observing the low score, the examiner notes that the difficulty level this season seems unusually high. Just then, Director Shin arrives quietly. Observing the results, the examiner greets him, surprised at how long he's been monitoring the test. Director Shin replied that Suho had been in the test for over 30 minutes, surprising the examiner, who moved closer to check the timer herself. She confirmed that it indeed had been 30 minutes. Clearly impressed, she commented that Suho was a skilled fighter and asked if he was a warrior. Shin informed her that Suho was in fact a healer. The examiner jokingly remarked that frequent lying could be a sickness, to which Shin insisted he was telling the truth. As they watched Suho on the screen, she noticed him wielding a sword and doubted Shin's claim. Shin encouraged her to take a closer look, and as Suho used a healing skill, she realized he truly was a healer. Amazed at his fighting skills, she questioned whether Suho would be disqualified if he didn't allow himself to be beaten to death, as per the healer's test requirement. Shin admitted he initially thought so too, but there was actually no reason for disqualification. The main goal for a healer was to protect the patient until the end, and Suho was accomplishing that. Rather than abandoning the patient to fight, he was staying close, healing as needed, and risking his life to fulfill the mission. Since Suho was meeting all the conditions, the practical program had no grounds for intervention, much less disqualification. As the monster charged at him, Suho positioned himself and gripped his sword, preparing to strike. He swiftly sliced the creature into pieces, then sheathed his sword, acknowledging he still needed to be faster. With a burst of speed, he dashed forward, leaped above another monster, and unsheathed his sword mid-air, cutting down the creatures below him. Moving with precision, he attacked and eliminated each monster one by one, swiftly reducing them to pieces before sheathing his sword once more. At that moment, a system notification appeared, recognizing his high level of proficiency in the skill footplay and congratulating him on mastering it. Suho considered how, despite this being virtual reality, the system's monitoring meant that his movements could be fully registered. From the system's perspective, it detected his physical actions as if he were performing them directly, allowing him to attain mastery over a physical skill. Although the experience gain was slower compared to real-world physical exertion, the environment was still ideal for skill training. Beyond his swordsmanship, Suho had acquired various other skills, upgrading all his sword techniques to an impressive rank. While this didn't yield experience points or items, it was satisfying nonetheless. If he continued to acquire and elevate all basic swordsmanship-related skills to a rank or higher, he might unlock a powerful technique like Park Young's Dragon Sword technique. Another system prompt appeared, noting that Suho's understanding of swordsmanship surpassed that of anyone else, which impressed the system. It offered him the chance to register a new swordsmanship skill by integrating basic sword techniques and footplay, with a unique rank assigned to it and the opportunity to name it himself. Suho, feeling a sense of accomplishment, decided on a name for his technique, the Guardian Sword. The system prompts Suho to confirm if Guardian Sword is the correct name for his newly created swordsmanship skill, to which he agrees. The system then congratulates him, acknowledging his supreme mastery in creating a unique skill. The sigil of Guardian Sword appears, and the system announces that he has crafted the Guardian Sword skill at rank S, enhancing the effects of his existing swordsmanship and footwork skills by 50%. In recognition of his remarkable achievement, the system grants him 10 bonus stat points and expresses hope that he will continue on his path as a swordsman. As a further reward, he is granted sword mastery at rank S, a privilege awarded only to those with a profound understanding of swordsmanship. The sword mastery skill lifts all acquisition and usage restrictions on swordsmanship skills and swords, increasing the effectiveness of all swordsmanship skills by an additional 50%. Suho reflects that in his previous life, it took over a decade to achieve this level of mastery, but with his knowledge now, the path has been far quicker. He realizes this newfound skill will significantly increase his value as a hunter. As a wave of monsters approaches, Suho notes that their numbers are fixed, likely as part of the test design. Having achieved everything he wanted here, he considers his options for finishing the test. He can either let himself be overwhelmed by the monsters or eliminate them all. For him, the answer is clear. He'll defeat every last one of them. Back in the test observation area, onlookers stare at Suho's results in disbelief. They marvel at his accomplishment, astonished that he managed to defeat every monster and still tend to the patient. This is the first time in the history of practical tests that something like this has occurred. The spectators agree that there's no point in even checking the rankings for this exam. Suho has clearly set a new standard. A few days later, at Hexagon Guild headquarters in the Hunter Test Strategy Planning Team, the team discusses their candidate, Ki-hyun, whom they are confident will secure the top rank this year. They've invested significant time and resources into his training, and they expect nothing less. As one team member opens his laptop to check the rankings, he remarks that this year Hexagon will finally surpass Prime in securing the top spot. However, as he reviews the results, something unexpected catches his eye. Confused, he asks who is on Suho. He scans the list again, realizing Ki-hyun's name isn't in the top position. Just then, his phone rings. It's the guildmaster calling. The scene shifts to Suho riding in a car, talking on the phone with Chulman. Chulman laughs, apologizing for the delay in calling and explaining that he's been swamped. He congratulates Suho on not only passing the exam, but doing so with the top score, noting how much Suho has surprised him. Suho shyly thanks him, attributing much of his success to Chulman's support. Chulman laughs, insisting it was all due to Suho's own skill. He also thanks Suho for helping to expose a large number of cheaters involved in skill doping. Because of Suho's insights, future testing regulations will be tightened to ensure fairness. Chulman's tone then becomes serious as he asks, even though it might be a bit premature, if Suho is still interested in joining the Great Hunter Association. Suho assures him that while he may spend a bit of time with the guild initially, his intention to join the association remains firm. Grateful, Chulman promises to contact him as soon as the next test schedule or recruitment round is announced. As they end the call, Suho encourages him to take a lunch break, and Chulman wishes him the same. After the call, Chulman glances at the lunch in his hand, deciding to take a break. In the taxi, Suho thinks back to Chulman's slightly hoarse voice and wonders if he's overworking himself. His thoughts are interrupted by another call, this time from Kim Soo-hae. She congratulates him on his success, informing him that the payment has been made per their agreement. Impressed by the efficiency of such a large organization, Suho compliments her on it. Taking the opportunity, Soo-hae brings up the topic of Suho joining the Nexus Guild. She assures him that he'd receive better treatment than at any other guild. Curious, Suho asks how far she's willing to go with this offer, and she responds that, as a top academy graduate and scholarship student, the terms can easily be adjusted to meet his expectations. She suggests they meet in person to discuss specifics. Politely, Suho thanks her for the invitation, explaining that he has personal plans today, but will check his schedule and get back to her. He reassures her that, as a Nexus scholarship student, joining Nexus would make sense. Relieved, Soo-hae enthusiastically agrees and promises to accommodate his schedule. thinking to herself that Suho must not sign with any other guild. She smiles confidently, giving a thumbs up to her nearby colleagues as they celebrate securing Suho's tentative agreement. Listening to her excitement on the phone, Suho chuckles, then says his farewells. Arriving at his destination, the taxi driver lets him know they've arrived. Suho steps out, reflecting that he's passed the test, received his license, and collected the promised deposit. Now, all that remains is to start his plans. That's all for today, guys. See you on the next upload.